I never understood how a life could start falling apart quietly, slowly, and then all at once. Maybe it had been happening for years and I was just too stubborn, too distracted, or too ashamed to admit it. But on that freezing morning in Chicago, with the air cutting through my jacket and my thoughts louder than the traffic, it felt like everything inside me was collapsing at the same time. I kept walking fast through the loop, pretending I was late for something important when in reality I wasn't late for anything. I just didn't want to stop moving, because if I stopped, I'd have to face myself. My breath came out in short clouds. My fingers were stiff even inside my pockets. The city felt hostile in a way that mirrored what was happening inside my chest. Cold, gray, unforgiving. I had slept barely 2 hours. The night before, I'd been staring at my cracked phone screen, ignoring notifications from creditors, ignoring messages from my sister asking if I was okay, ignoring the email from my boss demanding a project update I didn't have. I'd gotten used to ignoring things, maybe too used to it. For months I had been carrying this weight, guilt, pressure, fear, like stones in a backpack I couldn't take off. And the worst part was this quiet whisper inside my head that kept telling me I had ruined my life at 30, that I was failing, that I didn't belong anywhere, that I had disappointed everyone, especially myself. I had tried to silence that voice with work, coffee, distractions, late-night scrolling, but it always came back. Louder. Crueler. I don't know why that morning felt different. Maybe because it was colder than usual. Maybe because I was too tired to pretend. Maybe because deep down I knew I was reaching the limit of how long a person can carry a burden alone. I remember thinking, as I crossed the street near State Street, that if something didn't change soon, I would break. I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. My head was down, and I walked straight into someone sitting on the sidewalk. My foot caught on a cardboard box and I stumbled, almost falling. "Sorry," I muttered, annoyed, embarrassed, frustrated at myself for being so careless. That's when I really looked at him. He was a homeless man, maybe in his 50s, but it was hard to tell. His beard was uneven and graying. His coat was patched and torn in several places. His fingers were red from the cold, trembling as he held them close to a paper cup that barely had anything inside. His shoes looked like they had survived a war. But his eyes were the most unsettling thing I'd ever seen. Not because they were scary, but because they were calm, clear. Like he wasn't suffering, even though everything around him said he should be. He slowly lifted his head and looked at me as if he had been expecting me, as if he knew something I didn't. I swallowed hard. Something about that gaze made my chest tighten. "I said I'm sorry," I repeated, softer this time. He didn't blink. He just stared right into me. And then he spoke, quietly, with a certainty that didn't fit the moment. "You're carrying a burden that isn't yours." I froze. The street noise faded for a second. I didn't understand what he meant. I didn't even know how he knew I was carrying anything at all. My throat tightened, and I hated how those simple words hit deeper than they should have. I wanted to pretend it meant nothing, but something in me reacted instantly, like someone had touched a bruise I'd been hiding for years. "What?" I asked, but my voice came out smaller than I intended. He didn't repeat it. He didn't look away either. He just watched me like he could see the weight pressing on me, like he knew how close I was to breaking. For a moment I thought about kneeling beside him, asking what he meant, asking how he could possibly see through me like that. But then a black SUV pulled up next to us and the moment shattered. The doors opened and 2 security guards stepped out. The cold wind blew harder, hitting my face as I looked up. And then he appeared, Kanye West himself, walking out of the SUV in this oversized coat, hood partially up, hands in his pockets like he was trying to stay out of sight even while standing in the middle of the city. I blinked, confused. Kanye? Here? At this exact moment? The homeless man didn't react. He didn't even look. He kept staring at me with that same calm expression. But Kanye noticed him immediately. Or maybe he noticed us. Because he slowed down. his eyes following the strange tension in the air like he could feel it too. His security started guiding him toward the building entrance, but he stopped, raised a hand slightly. They hesitated but stepped back a few feet. Kanye walked toward us. I felt a wave of disbelief and panic. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone, much less someone like him. My life was in shambles. I could barely look at myself in the mirror. What was I supposed to say? "What's going on here?" he asked, voice steady but curious. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I couldn't explain. I didn't even understand myself. Kanye looked at the homeless man, then back at me. His eyebrows tightened a little. "You good, man?" I forced a nod, but it was a lie and everyone there could see it. The homeless man finally turned his eyes to Kanye, slowly, like he was measuring his energy. And then with the same tone, the same eerie calm, he repeated the sentence. "You're carrying a burden that isn't yours." Kanye's expression changed instantly. His posture straightened. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or pain. He took in a slow breath like those words hit him too. I felt the air shift. Something about that moment was too real, too raw, too uncomfortable for all of us. Kanye crouched slightly so he could see the man's face. "What did you say?" But the man didn't respond again. He just looked down at his hands, the moment slipping away as quickly as it had appeared. Kanye stood up and looked at me with a seriousness I wasn't prepared for. "Sometimes we pick up things that never belong to us," he said quietly. "Pressure, expectations, blame. That stuff will crush you if you don't put it down." I swallowed hard. My chest tightened again. He wasn't giving a speech. He wasn't trying to be profound. He was just telling the truth the way someone who has lived through too much tends to do. Simply, directly, painfully. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to ask the homeless man why he said that to me. I wanted answers. But I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing. Kanye nodded once as if he understood the silence inside me. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Seriously." Then he slipped his hands back into his pockets, turned, and walked toward the building with his security team. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. The cold didn't matter anymore. My thoughts didn't feel like mine. Everything inside me was shaking, but not from the temperature. That sentence echoed through me over and over. "You're carrying a burden that isn't yours." I didn't know it then, but that moment was about to unravel everything I thought I understood about my life, my past, and the weight I had been dragging behind me for years. And once it unraveled, there was no way to pretend anymore, no way to go back. I walked away from the sidewalk feeling like someone had cracked open the center of my chest without touching me. And for the rest of the day, no matter what I did, that single sentence wouldn't leave me alone. I tried to shake it off as I kept walking, but the sentence clung to me like the cold air clung to my skin. I reached the office building where I worked, but instead of going inside, I found myself standing outside the revolving doors, staring at my reflection in the glass. I looked exhausted, pale, hollow in ways I didn't want to admit. My eyes looked older than they should have, like they'd seen too much and understood too little. The world kept moving behind me. Cars, people, delivery bikes. But I felt stuck, as if I were frozen in a moment I didn't know how to leave. Inside the building, the elevator ride felt unbearably long. My heart was still pounding. My mind kept replaying the same scene. The man's eyes, the calmness in his voice, Kanye's reaction when he heard the exact same sentence. It didn't feel random. It didn't feel coincidental. But I refused to give it any meaning. Meaning would imply responsibility, and I wasn't ready to face anything that demanded more from me. When the elevator doors opened, I forced myself into the office. My boss spotted me instantly. "Where's the report?" he asked, not even bothering to say good morning. His voice was sharp, impatient. "I'm working on it," I replied, though the report was nowhere near done. "You were supposed to send it last night." "I know." "Well, Why didn't you? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't make me sound weak or irresponsible. I stared at my screen, hoping he'd leave. He didn't. You need to get it together, he said. Seriously. Something inside me twitched when he said that, because I'd been telling myself the same thing for months and I still couldn't do it. I felt the familiar wave of shame rising in my throat, tightening it until it hurt. I'll finish it, I said quietly. He walked away, but the damage was done. The guilt flooded me again, heavy and suffocating. My hands trembled on the keyboard. I stared at the blank document, unable to think. My mind wasn't in the office. It was back on that sidewalk. You're carrying a burden that isn't yours. I pushed the thought away and tried to focus, but everything around me seemed louder than usual. The clicking of keyboards, the buzzing of someone's phone, the copy machine, the shuffling of papers. It all felt overwhelming, like the world was insisting I pay attention to the things I'd been ignoring. Around lunchtime, I stepped outside to clear my head. I wasn't hungry, but I needed air that didn't taste like recycled office ventilation. The cold slapped me as soon as I walked out the door. I pulled my coat tighter and tried to breathe through the suffocating weight in my chest. My phone buzzed. It was my sister again. Are you okay? Haven't heard from you. Call me, please. I didn't answer. I couldn't deal with it. Not today. Not when I was barely keeping myself together. My phone buzzed again. This time from my ex, Emily. Did you pay the credit card bill like you said? They're calling me. Again. I closed my eyes. I had promised I would pay it last month, but things had only gotten worse. I had avoided her messages because I didn't have the money and didn't want to admit it. I had borrowed from her during the breakup, thinking I'd be able to catch up within weeks. Now it had been months. I typed out a reply 3 times, but deleted it every time. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want her to see what I had become. I turned off the screen and shoved the phone back in my pocket. You're carrying a burden that isn't yours. The sentence came back again, stronger, louder, as if the homeless man were standing right beside me. I didn't know why it bothered me so much. I didn't believe in signs or destiny or any of that. But something inside me shifted every time I heard it in my mind, like it was scraping against something buried deep. I headed back to the office, but on the way, I passed a group of people gathered around someone on the sidewalk. At first, I thought it was an accident or maybe someone collapsed from the cold. But then I saw the homeless man from earlier standing in the middle of the group talking. People were listening. Actually listening. Some nodding, some looking confused. Some walking away. A woman handed him a pair of gloves. Someone else gave him a cup of coffee. I stopped across the street and watched him. He wasn't preaching. He wasn't begging. He wasn't shaking a cup or asking for money. He was just talking in that same calm tone he'd used on me, as if he wasn't performing for anyone, as if he was speaking from a place deeper than most people ever reached. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but every person who listened reacted differently. Some smiled. Some teared up. Some walked away quickly, uncomfortable. Whatever he was sharing, it clearly touched something inside them. One sentence. That's all it took to shake me. So what was he telling them? I took a step toward him, then stopped. My stomach tightened. I wasn't ready to hear anything else. I didn't trust myself. I felt too fragile. One more hit to my emotions and I might break. So I turned away and forced myself back inside the building. The rest of the day blurred into a haze of unfinished work, ignored emails and fake nods whenever someone talked to me. At around 6, my boss approached my desk again. The report? I'm still working. It needs to be done tonight. And I'm not asking again. His tone was final. I felt the shame hit me hard. The same shame that had followed me for years. The same shame that made me feel like everything was always my fault. Like I was always behind. Always disappointing someone. I stayed until the office emptied out. The fluorescent lights buzzed, my eyes burned. My fingers hurt from typing and deleting, unable to put anything coherent together. Finally, around 9, I sent something, a weak, sloppy version of what was expected, but it was all I had left in me. I packed my things and left the building, exhausted beyond belief. The city was darker now, colder, quieter. I felt like I was dissolving into the night. Halfway home, my phone buzzed again. It was Emily. "We need to talk. Call me tonight." My chest tightened. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to explain myself. I didn't want anyone to see how badly I was failing. As I walked under the flickering streetlights, the pressure became unbearable. I felt like the world was closing in around me, suffocating me with obligations and expectations I couldn't meet. You're carrying a burden that isn't yours. I stopped walking. The sentence hit me so hard this time that I had to put my hands on my knees to steady myself. My breath fogged the air. My heart pounded. I didn't know why those words hurt so much, why they felt like a key turning inside a lock I didn't remember building. I straightened up slowly and looked around. I didn't know where else to go, but I knew exactly who I needed to find. Without thinking, without planning, without caring how it looked, I turned around and headed straight back toward the street where I had seen the homeless man earlier. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know what I wanted. I only knew that something inside me was cracking open, and he was the only person who seemed to understand it, even though he didn't know me at all. When I reached the street, my heart dropped. He was gone. The sidewalk was empty, except for a few people rushing home and a couple of late-night delivery bikes speeding by. The place where he had sat that morning was just cold concrete now. The cardboard box was gone. The paper cup was gone. It was like he had vanished. I stood there in the freezing air, breathing hard, feeling something deep inside me collapse in disappointment, but also confusion, fear, and something I couldn't name yet. He was gone. And I wasn't ready for the way that emptiness would follow me through the night. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the empty sidewalk like the concrete itself might give me answers. The cold stung my face, numbing my fingers, but I didn't move. I felt strangely abandoned, like someone had opened a door inside me and then disappeared before I had the chance to step through it. I didn't understand why it mattered so much. I didn't understand why I felt something close to grief, over a stranger whose name I didn't even know. Eventually I walked away, but the night felt heavier than before. The city lights seemed dimmer, the streets louder, my thoughts messier. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion dragged me down like gravity. My building was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel more alone than you actually are. I unlocked my door and went inside, dropping my bag on the floor without turning on the lights. I sat on the edge of my bed, elbows on my knees, hands covering my face. Everything felt wrong. Everything felt too heavy. I thought about calling my sister, but the shame stopped me. I thought about calling Emily, but the fear stopped me. I thought about the man on the sidewalk, and that stopped me too, but for a different reason. Because hearing his sentence again in my mind didn't feel like fear or shame. It felt like a truth I wasn't ready to face. "You're carrying a burden that isn't yours." I whispered the words into my hands like they might break if I said them any louder. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Calm, knowing, almost compassionate. I felt the wound inside me throbbing. The wound I had spent years pretending didn't exist. Around 4 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to sleep. I showered, got dressed, and left the apartment long before sunrise. The streets were empty. The cold was sharper. The city felt like a different world at that hour. I walked without a destination. Maybe I was hoping I'd see him again, though I didn't want to admit that to myself. But the truth was, I needed answers. From someone who didn't owe me anything, and yet somehow saw everything. I ended up back at the same street as before. Of course, he wasn't there. The sidewalk was spotless, as if no one had ever sat there, as if he had been just a fragment of my exhausted mind. It wasn't until I walked past a small diner a few blocks away that I saw a glimmer of hope. A barista was sweeping the sidewalk, her breath clouding the air. She looked like she'd been awake half the night, too. I approached hesitantly. "Hey, you work here often?" "Every day," she said without looking up. "Why? Have you seen a man here? Older guy, homeless, gray beard, calm eyes. He sits around here sometimes." She leaned on the broom and squinted at me. "You mean Daniel?" "Daniel," I repeated, surprised. "Yeah, him. Yeah, he comes by. Some mornings. Not every day. Depends." My heart picked up speed. "Do you know where he goes?" She shrugged. "Wherever he wants, I guess. He kinda drifts." "Do you know anything about him?" She gave me a look. One of those looks people give when they're not sure if you're being sincere or if you're planning to cause trouble. "He's not crazy," she said finally. "People think he is, but he's not. He talks differently, but he's harmless." "What do you mean, differently?" She shrugged again. "Like he knows things he shouldn't. Things about people. Things he shouldn't be able to see." I felt a chill run down my spine, not because of anything supernatural, but because that was exactly how it had felt when he spoke to me. "And this doesn't freak people out?" I asked. "Oh, it does," she said. "Some walk away, some get angry, but some come back. You look like one of those." I didn't deny it. She brushed a piece of hair behind her ear. "He'll be around. If you're meant to talk to him again, you will." I wanted to ask what that meant, but she had already turned and gone back inside. I walked away feeling strangely unsettled and strangely hopeful at the same time. I had no idea why this mattered so much. Why a stranger's sentence felt like a knife cutting through a knot inside me. Why I needed him to finish what he started. But the day didn't give me time to think. The world moved on whether I was ready or not. Work was worse than usual. My boss called me into his office before lunch. His expression was blank, which somehow felt worse than anger. "We need to discuss your performance," he said. My stomach dropped. "I know. I'm trying. That's the problem. You've been trying for months, and it's affecting the entire team." I nodded, staring at the floor. "We need to see improvement immediately," he said, "or we'll have to make changes." I felt the threat land like a punch. After the meeting, I sat at my desk staring at my computer. I couldn't focus. Every part of my body was tense. My mind kept drifting back to that sentence, back to the feeling that something was broken inside me, not because of the job, but because I had been pretending for too long. During my break, I stepped outside to breathe. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. "You're avoiding me. We can't keep doing this. I need to know what's going on." I put my phone away before the panic crushed me. "You're carrying a burden that isn't yours." I closed my eyes, trying to understand why it felt so familiar, why it hurt, why it felt like the sentence wasn't about the present at all, but about something older, something I had buried so deep I'd forgotten what it looked like. A memory surfaced. My father's voice, a slammed door, the sound of something breaking. My teenage self standing in the hallway, paralyzed, watching my family fall apart in a way that I somehow believed was my fault. I had spent years silently carrying that shame, that responsibility, convincing myself that if I had been better, smarter, quieter, stronger, maybe things wouldn't have collapsed. I felt my throat tighten, my eyes burned. I wasn't ready to face this. Not yet. I spent the rest of the day on autopilot, barely present, barely functional. When the clock hit 6, I grabbed my things and left without saying a word. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't go home. Not with all of this boiling inside me. I walked through the city without direction until I found myself near the river. The water was dark, reflecting the city lights in broken, shaky pieces, like a mirror that didn't know how to stay still. I leaned on the railing and let the cold wind hit my face. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, unhurried. I turned. Kanye West was standing a few feet away. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. What were the odds? Why here? Why now? But he wasn't surrounded by security this time. No SUV, no crowd. Just him, wearing a simple coat and a hood pulled up. He looked smaller, quieter, more human than before. He nodded once as if he'd been expecting me. "You're out late," he said. I let out a shaky breath. "Yeah, couldn't be home tonight." "I know the feeling," he said. We stood there in silence for a moment, the wind moving around us like it was trying to listen. "You came looking for him, didn't you?" Kanye asked. I didn't ask who he meant, we both knew. "I needed to understand," I whispered. I don't know. Something." He nodded again. "He doesn't talk much. But when he does, you should pay attention." "Do you know him?" I asked. Kanye exhaled through his nose, a tired kind of sound. "Not really. But he said something to me once, years ago, something that stuck." "What did he say?" Kanye looked out at the water. "He told me I was running from a fire that wasn't mine." A chill ran through me. "What did that mean?" I asked. "It took me a long time to figure it out," he said softly. "A long time." I swallowed hard. "And when you did?" He looked at me with eyes that carried more exhaustion and truth than I'd ever seen. "I stopped running," he said, "and everything changed." For a moment, I felt the world quiet around us. The river, the city, the cold, it all faded, leaving only the raw truth between two people who didn't owe each other anything, but somehow understood everything. "What am I supposed to do?" I whispered. He shrugged gently. "Not my place to tell you, but when you hear the truth, you'll know." I looked back at the water, feeling something shift inside me, a tiny crack of light in a place that had been dark for years. Kanye stepped back. "Take care of yourself," he said again, but this time it sounded deeper, heavier, like he knew I wouldn't sleep until something inside me finally broke open. He walked away into the night, leaving me standing alone by the river, staring at the reflection of a life I no longer recognized, and a truth I was finally starting to understand. I stayed by the river long after Kanye disappeared into the shadows. The city noise felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. That conversation had peeled back something inside me I'd spent years trying to seal shut. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew. I knew exactly what burden wasn't mine. I just didn't want to face it. Eventually, I forced myself to walk away. My legs were heavy, but I moved anyway, letting the cold numb the storm inside my chest. I walked for blocks, turning corners without thinking, until I realized I had no idea where I was. The streets were unfamiliar. The traffic thinned, the lights dimmed. And suddenly, everything around me felt quieter, softer, almost gentle. I stopped near a small old brick building with a mural painted on the side. It was worn and chipped, but I could still make out the outline of a family holding hands. My throat tightened as a memory surfaced, me at 13 standing in a hallway with my hands over my ears, listening to my parents scream at each other, believing I could have stopped it if I had been enough, better, quieter, more perfect. That was the burden, the shame I had carried like a chain around my ribs, the guilt that had shaped every decision I'd made since childhood, the belief that I had to fix everything, everyone, every situation, or else something terrible would happen. It wasn't mine. It had never been mine. The realization hit me so hard I had to sit on a curb just to breathe. For years I had carried responsibility for things I couldn't control. My father's temper, my mother's sadness, their choices, their mistakes, their pain. I had swallowed it until it poisoned me, and I had mistaken that poison for identity. I didn't know who I was without it. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was my sister again. "Please, just call me. I'm worried." Her words made my chest ache. Not because of guilt. Well, maybe a little. But because I suddenly realized how much I had been pushing her away. How much she had tried to reach me. How much I had shut everyone out while I drowned in something that wasn't even mine. My hands trembled as I dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. "Hello? Are you okay?" "You scared me." I closed my eyes. My voice cracked when I spoke. "I'm sorry." She was silent for a moment. "What's going on? Talk to me." I haven't been okay for a long time," I admitted, and I didn't know how to say it. Her voice softened. "You don't have to carry everything alone." I let out a shaky breath. "I thought I did." "You don't," she whispered. "You never did." Hearing her say that felt like something inside me finally unclenched, like I had been holding my breath for years and didn't realize it until that moment. We talked for a long time, not about solutions, not about fixing anything, just about being honest, being human, being imperfect. When the call ended, I felt lighter. Not free yet, but lighter. The next morning, I went back to the same diner where the barista had mentioned Daniel. I waited outside for hours, watching every passerby, hoping to see those calm eyes again. The cold was harsh, but I refused to leave. I needed to thank him. I needed to understand why he chose that sentence. Why me? Why now? By noon, I finally saw him. He appeared at the end of the block, walking slowly, as if the world couldn't rush him even if it tried. My heart pounded as I approached him. When he saw me, he stopped, quiet, patient, like he knew why I was there. "I've been looking for you," I said. He nodded once, as if that was expected. "You said something to me," I continued, swallowing the lump in my throat. And it opened something inside me. It hurt. But it helped. I didn't realize how much of my life I've been living for other people. How much of their pain I've been carrying. You saw that in me. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look proud or surprised. He just listened, truly listened. "Why did you say that?" I finally asked. He shrugged lightly. "Sometimes people walk by with eyes that are screaming," he said. "Yours were louder than most." I felt my eyes burn. "How did you know it wasn't my burden?" "Your shoulders told me," he said simply. "People carrying their own weight look tired. People carrying someone else's weight look broken." The truth of that hit me deeper than I expected. "How do I put it down?" I whispered. He looked at me with quiet compassion. "You already started." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thank you," I said. "Really?" He gave me the faintest smile. "Don't thank me. Just live lighter." I wanted to ask him more. About his life. His story. How he came to know so much pain and yet remain untouched by bitterness. But something in his expression told me he had already given me what I needed. Nothing more was required. He walked past me and continued down the street, blending into the city as if he were just another shadow carried by the wind. I didn't follow. I let him go, understanding that some people come into your life not to stay, but to redirect you before you lose yourself completely. Over the next few weeks, everything slowly shifted. I talked to my sister more. I apologized to Emily and arranged to pay her back properly. I started therapy, something I had avoided for years because I didn't want to seem weak. I confronted the old stories I had been telling myself about responsibility and failure. I even began making small changes at work, asking for help when I needed it, setting boundaries, showing up with honesty instead of fear. It wasn't perfect. Healing never is. But every day felt a little less heavy. And one evening, months later, as I walked across the city during sunset, I saw Daniel again, sitting quietly, talking to a stranger who looked like he was carrying the same invisible weight I once did. This time I didn't approach. I didn't interrupt. I just watched from a distance, grateful, because he had saved me without asking for anything in return. And the truth he gave me, the truth hidden in that one simple sentence, became the compass that slowly guided me back to myself. You're carrying a burden that isn't yours. I finally understood. Life gets lighter when you stop holding what was never meant for your hands. As I walked away, I felt something warm settle in my chest. Not joy exactly, but peace. A peace I hadn't known since before my teenage years. A peace I thought I'd never feel again. And if you're listening to my story right now, maybe it's because some part of you is carrying something too. Something that doesn't belong to you. Something you've held for far too long. So I'll ask you the same question I eventually had to ask myself. What burden have you been carrying that never belonged to you? Tell me in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear what you have to say. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. And before I go, just remember, this is a fictional story created for entertainment. Any resemblance to real events or use of public names is purely narrative and not meant to represent real-life situations.